All right, I'm going to go over to my next job over here. Stay on stage. Yeah. Okay, so the next session we're going to have is a breakthrough CX, leveraging generative AI agents to drive an efficient customer journeys. It's featuring Hillary Scherer, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Principal Product Manager of ASAP. Moderator is Tara. All right, let's give a round of applause to them.
Switch seats.
I'm going to change my perspective.
Perfect.
Changing my perspective. Hillary, I'm going to give you just a few minutes to share with the audience what ASAP does. When you and I met, I was very intrigued. I've led call centers for years and years, and it is so complex, and oftentimes you think, oh, I'm just going to pop in some technology to make it easier. And many times, all I've done is made it worse for my teams and made it worse for the customer. I tried to launch chat at Toys R Us about 10 years ago and fell on my face. It was awful. So I'm really excited about what ASAP does, what you do, and what it offers to your clients. So if you can give us just a little bit of background on ASAP.
Sure, happy to. Well, first, launching chat is not easy, but that's where ASAP comes in. So we are a company that makes LM and AI solutions and apply them towards really tough, thorny problems in the customer experience space. My role at ASAP as a principal product manager is I work on one of our products called Generative Agent, which is an LLM-based conversational assistant that solves complex problems across chat and voice. And in particular, my focus there is on the core architecture of generative agent systems and how those scale to our enterprise customers.
So the easiest job in the building.
Yeah.
I love that. And can you just kind of, level set for the group? We talk AI and then we get into Gen AI. What is the difference between what many, I would say, normal humans refer to as AI, and then when you talk about Gen AI, very, very different.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question and something that is first and foremost in a lot of my conversations with new customers. The hardest thing for folks to understand, whether they're new to a generative AI journey or if they've run a couple POCs that have maybe succeeded or not, is the sort of fundamental variability of something that is truly generative AI based. So we have these large language models that are capable of really impressive processing and complex reasoning, but on their face and at their core, they are variable, and that's a really hard thing to square with, especially large enterprises that have come to expect really reliable and repeatable and consistent results. So that is a very difficult paradigm to try and shift, and a lot of where I spend my time in working with our customers.
It puts us in a very uncomfortable space. We have teams that have crafted scripts to answer customers. We have spent years and years trying to align the message that goes out to our customer, and now these new tools are asking us to give up a little bit of that control and of that message. And so for the leaders in the room that are kind of making these transitions, how should they be thinking about building trust and safety into generative AI from day one, rather than, oh my God, I launched it and look at it, and now you're starting to see some really odd answers come out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think trust comes in a couple different ways. At ASAP, and I think table stakes is anything that interacts with your end customers has to be reliable. You have to be able to trust that the thing in production isn't going to go sideways, so that is baseline and what we're constantly striving towards. But I think a knock-on effect to that for organizations in particular who are new to generative AI or maybe have tried some of these POCs before is it can help with the change management within an organization. So if you can trust the technology and you can see it working maybe in a limited capacity to start and then gradually you scale, over time you start to build that trust throughout the organization, and folks can become more comfortable with this new technology and this new frontier.
Because oftentimes I would see my reps skip over anything that was generated for them. They thought they knew better. They thought that they understood the customer better. And this is going to take a lot for leaders and for team members to start to give up a little bit of that control. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see. I think even on our last panel, we talked about when you involve teammates in planning and in the experience, you can actually build out evangelists. And I think that's going to be very, very important for organizations that are implementing Gen AI. Okay. And I would like to talk a little bit about governance. I know it's not the sexiest thing in the room, but I think when we think about putting AI into our businesses, especially Gen AI into our businesses, how should organizations be thinking about governance, the frameworks, the models to oversee the results? How have you seen that work best?
Easier to start with when it doesn't work, which is if someone comes in and says, just get rid of all of your existing processes. I work with, in particular, a lot of customers in regulated organizations and industries, and we know that these governance models exist for a reason. And so where I usually like to start is to first understand the frameworks that are in place and what they're serving. Maybe let's take testing as an example. So UAT, user acceptance testing, is a really established and repeatable framework across any technology delivery. You have your test case, you test it once, it passes, you test it 100 times, it's going to pass 100 times. Often it becomes taking that expectation around 100% pass rate and nudging it towards a framework that works with generative AI. So we might say, rather than 100% of all of your test cases passing, let's focus on the critical things that are really important to the business, your must-dos. We'll get 100% pass rate there. Everything else, the sort of tonality of the response or the length of the response, we look for about 80% pass rate. So it's taking something existing and figuring out how to adapt it to a new technology.
And if you've found with customers, I come from a telco, which obviously it has, the rules are so intense. But then I come from a toy brand where they let me do pretty much whatever I wanted and push buttons and launch things. Do you find there's a varying degree across your customers when it comes to governance and framework?
Absolutely. Telcos in particular, I've worked with quite a few, and they do tend to be on one end of the spectrum. So at ASAP, we have a few different ways to solve that or to account for that spectrum. For the most extreme, or I won't say extreme, but at one end of the spectrum, when we need real reliability on a lot of really critical business processes, then we might introduce a mix of both generative and deterministic workflows. So you let the generative agent interact with your customer, but for key business processes, you move to a more traditional flow where you can be absolutely sure that 100% of the time, it's going to work the same time. And that's really helpful with anything that is regulatory or really tightly controlled. The toy brands, or the other end of the spectrum, have a little bit more flexibility and freedom. So it's really about designing the program and the product in a way that can accommodate both ends.
So you design it where the Gen AI tool can actually handle 80% of the interaction with the consumer, and then do a nice, simple pass off to a human.
Yeah, that's another great point. We at ASAP have a feature of Generative Agent called Human in the Loop, which is another tool and another way to control or add more control into that spectrum. So let's say you are an airline customer who may have experienced a delay, as I did yesterday, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room did as well. And you're looking to rebook your flight, and you don't want to pay the change fee for obvious reasons. You could handle that interaction with Generative Agent, and at the point that the customer says, I want an exception to this stated business policy, we pass that off to a human agent on the back end to either review or deny the request. So it's a mix of both technology and human in the loop. And the human agents are assisting the generative agent at a point in time based on the design of the program.
So that's with intention, almost putting a speed bump into the experience.
Yep, exactly.
And not letting a consumer, because I can imagine when it comes to dollars or refunds or anything, many organizations get a little antsy. Does the Gen AI get smarter and learn from all of those human-in-the-loop interactions?
Absolutely. And that's also something that we partner with our customers for. So we might start by saying, with an organization that's a bit more risk-averse, let's pass off for some of these key decisions that maybe there's an API for, or maybe there's a way for a generative agent to assist with that, but we want to maintain that control at least initially. And then over time, as we build trust in the technology and we can show in production that it is reliable and repeatable, we relax some of that control and bring more of those interactions into generative agent. So it's a spectrum that we are continuously tweaking over the life cycle of a customer's time with ASAP.
I'm guessing that's probably very specific to the customer as well, the customer that you're selling to.
Yes.
I would be a lot looser with my toy brand than I would with my telco brand.
Yeah. And we have a sense when folks are coming in which end of the spectrum they'll fall on.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so, we've talked about customer being those that work with ASAP. When we think about customers and employees, I think there's a lot of work that we need to do to build confidence with consumers, with our employees, when it comes to the decisions that we're making with AI. How do you build transparency with the teams and almost transparency with the consumer that they are in a Gen AI experience? How do you build that into your design?
Yeah, I think transparency is so critical at every layer of this. I feel like I'm repeating myself a few times, but it is the thing that will continue to build trust, and trust is the single most important thing that we try to build with our customers. So I'll give you maybe a couple sort of product-focused ways that ASAP approaches this. First, at every turn of a conversation, we have safety baked in. So we check to see if a customer is trying to cheat the system a little bit. We check generative agent's output to see if it's a hallucination or if it's grounded. But if anything misses either of those checks, we also have retroactive analysis on every single turn of every single conversation to identify potential mistakes. So we don't save or win anything by obscuring those mistakes. We have to be as transparent as possible, as quick as possible, so that our customers can react in as close to real time.
Kind of opened up a can of worms, and it came up in the last panel as well when it comes to fraud. And what I find is that there are brilliant minds that do good work and brilliant minds that do bad work. And I have to assume there are people that are designing and figuring out ways to cheat the system when it comes to Gen AI. And I put my fraud hat on from the toy side, where everybody wanted to steal the Wii's, or they were stealing baby strollers, or they were figuring out ways to get around our website. Are you starting to see that? Like, are you starting to see people who are testing the boundaries of Gen AI but doing it for bad?
Yeah, absolutely. We see this quite frequently. Luckily, most of the attempts are not too sophisticated, I'll say. It's someone coming in and saying, put 50,000 airline miles in my account. First of all, Generative Agent doesn't have the ability to put miles in the account, so we limit the control and the risk by access to tools. But secondly, we've got a lot of really deep research around that specific, or protecting against that specific type of attack or injection. So there's a lot of established frameworks for how you might try to get around an LLM, and on the flip side, there's equally as many frameworks for how to defend against that. So it's a constant tension that we're always thinking about.
My goodness. You know that there are going to be people out there that are going to find ways to bend this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so beyond pilots, beyond POCs, where have you seen Gen AI scale successfully, like the most successfully? What are ways that we should be aspiring to and looking towards of really leveraging and harnessing AI to make a difference?
Yeah. I think a couple things come to mind. You touched on this in the previous session too, but there's this instinct that I've seen where companies hear about generative AI and there's all of this motion and activity and sort of anxiety and a little bit of FOMO to not be left behind. And so I've worked with customers who say, well, I just want to throw all my APIs at an LLM and have it automate 100% of my contacts. And we know that's not possible for a variety of reasons. So what is not often the most attractive strategy, but I think works really well, is landing and expanding and starting small. So I'll give an example. We work with an airline based in the US, and one of the use cases that we started with was traveling with pets, which doesn't have any APIs. It's not taking any action in the system, but it is a really complex policy with a lot of exclusions and restrictions and weight limits and breed limits and country restrictions and various forms and paperwork. And it also has the benefit of being pretty emotionally resonant. So I'm taking a trip with my dog in a couple weeks, and I have been experiencing extreme stress about all of the different restrictions and requirements. And so what we did was take that really complex policy, feed it into a very particular workflow within Generative Agent, and we've seen really great results with that. So it's small in the sense that it's not scoped to every single tool that this airline has, but it is a really impactful use case. It has the benefit of having some real emotional heft, and it gets people interested and excited and then open to the idea of layering in more tools that they might have previously been a little bit nervous about.
That's interesting. So you're actually, as an organization, you look at your 1,000 calls that are all about the same thing, that you think I want to push in and have a tool answer that because they're low touch. Other organizations are going into, low volume, but incredibly complex to build out. That's incredible. I mean, I would never take my dog on a plane. I mean,
I'm very nervous about it. Anyone, if you have a flight coming up with your dog, I know all about the pet policies now.
You need any other assistance on that side? Fascinating. And I think that, that's probably one of the ways to one of our earlier questions about building trust, right? There is so much emotional connection to that. And it could be dogs, it could be kids, it could be, aging parents, people that could, organizations may want to approach it two ways. And yes, there's this shiny ball of low-hanging fruit and take all of these, when will my order deliver, and push that into automation. But the real challenge that can become consuming and actually could become a brand deterrent for a lot of organizations are those ones that have emotional ties that are so complex.
Yep.
I love that. Okay, now everybody has to go back and find the most challenging situation that your organization deals with and start to run it through some Gen AI test cases. I love that. Okay, so as AI takes on more routine interactions, like I said, the 1,000, where's my order, how should leaders start to think about workforce planning? I mean, you are a complement to what their teams are doing. You're going to be impacting the teams, but how do you think about employee deployment, right? To actually truly maximize having technology and human in the loop.
Yeah.
It's a new phrase I love, human in the loop, tying it together. Like this is going to become a whole new resource planning nightmare, I would think.
Yeah, it certainly changes workforce management and staffing in the contact centers. And I think if I could amend my previous answer, it's also important to get those teams involved and on board as soon as possible, because it does absolutely change the way that these staffing models and compensation models work. If we take human in the loop, for example, we go from one agent assisting maybe 2 to 3 customers in parallel on chat at a time, to one human agent assisting many more customers because they are interacting with generative agent at a point in time in the customer's conversation. So they're not there for the whole thing. The generative agent reaches out to the human agent for assistance and approval and potentially an exception. So it enables greater concurrency, which of course has an impact on staffing. But where I think we've seen this work really well is to have your human agents, who are your experts on policies, have them involved in the tuning and training and tweaking and refining of generative agent or any generative AI agent. Your human experts know your policies best. At ASAP, we enable a self-contained workflow, so a human agent might be able to say, oh, a generative agent didn't quite get that policy right. I'm going to flag this conversation. That conversation becomes a ticket. That ticket becomes a change in the code. That change in the code becomes something that gets released. And so now your human agents have moved from assisting the customer throughout the entirety of that conversation to assisting and having a real impact on the behavior of a generative agent. So it's a shift, and it's really important to get workforce management teams involved as quick as possible.
So now you've prompted, so it's not just resource planning, planning my reps, planning for call volume spikes through the day. Now it could be impacting compensation. You know, you pay per call, or you pay a salary, and then if there's a sale, there's commission. So now there's complexity around pay. You also now are going to change the resource and the skill sets for contact centers, for call centers across Canada, in how we think about hiring. I think there's going to be some complexity as people think about integrating tools like this into their business. Where and how, and am I prepared? Because if you do this without thinking through not only the scheduling, but the resources required on the back end to be able to identify what to do when Gen AI didn't quite. Is that a support function that ASAP kind of has for teams to kind of work through?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with customers on this journey all the time. And for me, it starts always from a point of transparency. We, from the first conversation, and maybe my sales colleagues would wish that I glossed over some of this, but from my first conversation, I'd say LMs are variable, so we need to plan for that. We need to start starting that mindset shift. Your LMs are variable. Your workforce management might change a little bit if we have human in the loop, and that's always a decision that we discuss. But we can help you along that journey because we've seen this and done this quite a few times already. But it is absolutely a transformation, and unless you are ready to embark on that sort of fully, then you may not see the success or certainly the adoption of any generative AI pilot that you might hope for.
There's a lot to think about. It is not just the person who manages the contact center, the call center, and its teams. This is going to impact the entire organization and how we're going to have to kind of transform our own workforce.
Yeah, it's as much technology change as it is organizational change.
I think that's the biggest challenge that many organizations are facing. The pace of change with AI right now is running at 100, 200, 300%. I mean, the developments are happening so quickly. Human and our ability to change has not caught up, nor is it anywhere near. And I think that's the biggest disconnect that a lot of organizations are finding as they bring AI in, and there's challenges. There's challenges with the goals and outcomes that were defined because the humans weren't prepared. So I love that you have some kind of complement or some kind of service that helps people think through, how do I get my teams prepared to make the most out of this new tool? It's incredible. Well, we have a little bit of time for questions, so I'm going to open it up. We have one right in the center here. I don't know why I get up. I don't need to get up. And can you just give us your name and who you are?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nick. Thank you so much for the insights. Okay, thank you. Question for you, actually a twofold. We spoke a lot about what the product does or what it can do, what the change that it can cause. As a person who's looking into getting into this for an organization, how do you deal with the data in, right? Like you have legacy systems that are in place that hold this data. They're not, how to put it, 2025 enough to be able to meet with those guidelines or compliance or security. And at the same time, what sort of ethical responsibility that you have? Like you mentioned, AI is moving at 200, 300%, but humans and compliance and legislation is not there yet. So how do you sort of balance, how do you get ready for AI? And at the same time, what things or what controls do you put in place that, I'm not gonna say Skynet, but if anybody had that on bingo, you got it. But how do you sort of protect for that?
Yeah. I'll take the Skynet question first and then jump back to the first part. But we are incredibly sensitive about customer data. I never want to be in the position, I want zero data retention and zero data in our systems as much as possible. And we always start from a place of being extremely conservative and only persisting and only leveraging at a point in time the data that we need to complete the transaction. So we have to be good stewards of our customers' data. We have to integrate well with our customer systems. We have to make the analytics and data about the generative AI interaction readily available so that you can bring it in to your own BI tools and have that end-to-end view of the customer experience. To the first part of your question about tools that may not be 2025 ready, I have worked with many customers over the past 6 odd years at ASAP, and I have never seen an API response that is ready out of the gate. So a lot of what we do when we start embarking on these projects and implementations is a bit of sort of deep archaeology on the API side in particular. We have transformation tools within ASAP that will take the raw response and transform it into a format that is easily consumed by an LLM, so that it wouldn't require IT resourcing or any real coding or developer knowledge. But we try to be as agnostic of the tools as possible because ASAP and I understand that very rarely do we work with a customer who has ready-made tools right out of the gate that require no massaging. That's just not the world we live in at this moment.
Any other questions out there?
Good morning. Hi, Hillary.
Yeah. Hi.
Question for you and also an invitation for anybody in the audience to connect. So within my team, we tend to swing between the POCs that interns would run, let's throw a bunch of interns at the problem, to my IT department obsessing with multiple integrations that we need to create in order to see any success.
Yeah.
How do you approach your use case refinement where you land somewhere in the middle, hopefully, just a little bit more daring than the POC that will soon be forgotten, but away from multi-million-dollar 5-year roadmaps that hopefully will be laughable a couple of years from now because we evolve so quickly?
Yeah, great question. I think an ideal use case has a couple identifiers for me. It's reasonably high volume, doesn't have to be your highest intent, probably shouldn't be your highest intent to start. It is medium to high complexity, so we don't necessarily need to be in front of every interaction because there are deterministic and more cost-effective solutions for things that are low complexity and don't require the type of reasoning that any generative AI pilot might or certainly has. So high volume, medium to high complexity, and is solved by tools that either your agents have access to or policies that might be a little bit hard to understand. So if we think about the pets use case that I referenced earlier, it is on the lower end of the volume spectrum, but very complex because of all of the different nuances and parameters and things that change the answer. And there was a really detailed policy, albeit very hard to understand, but a detailed policy that exists that we could use to base the use case from. So it's not, it is not an exact science, or I don't have a sort of decision tree to say yes or no, but somewhere in the sweet spot of complexity and volume is usually where we like to start.
And so, just expanding on that pet
Yeah.
carrier use case, just 1 second. Sorry, if that, I can come back to it during the break. I just wanted to understand what is the client outcome for that use case specifically for you.
Yeah.
Because it's not very clear for
Yeah.
me.
So before the pets use case, customers would come in and say, I want to travel with my dog to London, which is the exact route that I'm taking, and I don't know where to start. Because this is also a really a moment of kind of high stress and a lot of emotion. Yeah, high anxiety, as I can attest to. And there was no way to successfully handle that with a deterministic flow, because the questions that the human agents asked would be, okay, where are you flying from? Where are you flying to? What is the make of the airline? How big is the dog? How big is the kennel that the dog is in? How much does the dog weigh? How much does the kennel weigh? There are certain date restrictions in the winter around Thanksgiving. No animals can fly in the cargo hold. So to build that in a decision tree would be too complex. We have the policy. We allow a generative agent to reason through that, and now we deflect a majority of the interactions from ever reaching a customer service agent. So we contain them within that experience.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hillary. Now I can stand up. I appreciate it. I think